right, today we're going to look at the U.S. entrance into World War II and how the United States turned the tide of World War I, tipping the power and the balance for the Allies to win. So today we'll first start off with once war was declared in the United States, we then began to rev up our ammunition and our money and our soldiers for war. So the doughboys arrive in Europe. When the war broke out, there was actually only about 200,000 men who were registered in the United States for armed services. By 1918, we saw that increase drastically to 24 million who had registered, and that is because of the draft. It was activated, and we know that as the Selective Service Act. But although 24 million were registered, we actually only saw about 2 million of those who actually fought in Europe, and 3 million of those 24 million were actually called up to fight at all. The group that actually went over to fight was called the American Expeditionary Force, or the AEF. One group that particularly had a lot of influence in World War I was the African American population. Over 400,000 African Americans served in the armed forces, and more than half of those were actually in France, where a lot of the fighting took place. The nickname the Doughboys came about because of the white belts that the U.S. Soldiers wore, and they used a doughy substance to help clean the belts. Also, there's other interpretations that say that the American soldier was called the Doughboy because we were considered soft or unprepared for the terrors of war. Here you can see a couple of recruitment posters from World War I, and just there was a lot of detail to this is a prideful thing. Do not disrespect your family by not serving. And here you can see a picture of the doughboy with the hat shaped like a bowl because it was used for multiple purposes in fighting. And again, the bayonets were still pretty heavy, just as they were in the Civil War and the American Revolution. One of the new fighting tactics in World War I was the use of the airplane. After the Wright brothers were the first successful flight, the airplane had advanced to be used in actual combat. And one of the famous heroes of the time of World War I was Eddie Redenbacher, a very famous race car driver who actually shot down 26 aircrafts in the German Flying Circus. If you've ever heard of the Red Baron, he was a part of the German Flying Circus. And then Eddie Redenbacher actually fought in over 134 air battles, which is a pretty phenomenal number. So once the United States enters the war and begins mobilizing troops to Europe, the United States first wanted to tackle the German U-boats because the U-boats were attacking trade ships going into Britain, and that impacted the United States because we were a major trading partner to Great Britain. By 1917, the war had been raging for 3 years. The Allies were tired. They have lost a lot of casualties. They have spent a lot of money, and they are running out of ammunition. So the Allies, the U.S. troops, they brought freshness and enthusiasm to the front line, and almost to a sense where they were almost excited and gang-ho to fight. One of the first actions that the United States took after controlling the U-boats was we stopped German advancement into France and actually saved Paris, which was a huge holdback for Germany because that was a major landmark for them to take. Along with World War I, we have new weapons and new hazards that the soldiers had to face, such as mustard gas, and inhaling this really tore apart the nervous system and basically felt like your lungs were going to collapse. The lack of sleep, you can imagine being in the trenches, constantly feeling need to be awake so you do not get shot by the enemy if he is making his way across no man's land. Trench foot was also another treacherous hazard because these men were in ditches basically for months at a time, and when it rained, that water sat in the ditch and our skin absorbs it like a sponge. So the foot would essentially rot off unless it was amputated. Um, the major allies, once the United States enters the war, we will see Russia leave the war. Okay? Russia will lose over 12 million citizens in World War one of the largest casualties we will see. So by 1917, they are not running out of manpower because they have a lot of manpower, but they are running out of well-trained manpower, and they had to find a place to stop. The United States, when we entered in 1917, again, some new machinery we saw come out were the U.S. tanks that were used on in the trenches and in no man's land to really get across the barbed wire and the mines. And it was an effective way to move a group without coming under attack. We also see machine guns make their entrance, especially with the airplanes. You can't shoot a pistol while you're flying an airplane. And also in the trenches, when you're trying to take out a line of soldiers in a trench, machine gun fire is the easiest way. Hand grenades would be thrown out into no man's land, and through marches, mustard gas would be used to deter the enemy, and landmines were placed in no man's land as well. Here you can see the tank of World War One. The very archaic compared to our tanks today, made of steel, but they were very top heavy, so they had to create these back pieces to actually make it so they could work through the ditches that were created in no man's land in the trenches. When Russia pulled out, it wasn't just because of their manpower. In the early 1917, again, they had lost so many soldiers that the government actually was being revolutionized. Tsar Nicholas II was forced out of power, and in its place, the Bolsheviks took over, and Vladimir Lenin will take the stage and take charge of Russia, and we will see the onset of communism. Bum, bum, bum. All right, this is going to lead us into many years from now, the paranoia over communism. We're going to see it grow, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why we were so paranoid about it. Here's Vladimir Lenin himself. So the United States is on the offensive. So what things that we did, again, we stopped German advancements into France. Another famous hero is Alvin York. He is known for killing 25 German soldiers just with a rifle and a revolver in a small group of men and capturing 132 German prisoners. Alvin York actually believed that war was evil. However, he made an exception and said that war is necessary if you're fighting for a good cause. And his original beliefs made him known as a conscientious objector. But he did ultimately become a hero for the United States and the Allies. By November of 1918, Austria-Hungary officially surrenders to the Allies, and Germany will begin to collapse. The Kaiser will flee Germany to Holland and leave the throne in November as well, and Germany officially begins to collapse. Mutiny spread quickly through Germany. Groups of soldiers and workers began to want to create councils. And the famous quote that on the 11th hour of the 11th day in the 11th month of 1918, Germany officially agreed to an armistice. Some of the final tolls of World War I for the Allies, it was the bloodiest war up to 1918 that the world had ever seen. Deaths totaled 22 million, half of those civilians, 20 million wounded, 10 million who were refugees in their own countries and needed to move elsewhere. And the total cost of war was over $338 billion, a massive expenditure for these countries involved. U.S. casualties included 48,000 actually in battle. 62,000 died of disease. So you can see which was the more deadliest cause, which was disease. The United States really thought that at the end of the war, everything would return to the way it was. Unfortunately, America will never return to the same way it was after seeing the Great War. So your activity at the end of class yesterday was to choose a weapon or a tactic that was used during World War I. Create the web that you see here by researching similar weapons and tactics that were used before it, factors that led up to the use of this weapon, how this weapon evolved in later wars, so you got to look into the future, and then what effects did this weapon or tactic have on the outcome of World War I. Thank you guys, and see you in class.